This presentation is called Decoupling M&I Water Use from Population Growth. Can Utah Cities Help Save the Great Salt Lake? And now I'd like to introduce Todd Stoneley. He's the Assistant Director of the Utah Division of Water Resources. Thanks, Todd.
As you can see, I couldn't fit my subtitle on this presentation title slide, so I am going to talk about how cities in Utah can help save the Great Salt Lake. It's not like I'm skipping that. But yeah, this is a cool topic. So I wanted to start out by kind of sharing some conventional wisdom or common practice about water in the industry, and maybe some misperceptions or what are becoming myths now. So a growing community and economy requires more water in order to thrive. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, if we just stopped approving all these developments along the Wasatch Front, we would be fine, because that's the source of our problem with water. And other things like that. Traditional engineering practice, I'm a civil engineer, has focused on increasing the available supply to accommodate growth. That's just the way we've approached this issue over the many decades. That is changing, but that's the common practice. Although managing water demand is important, it has generally not been viewed as a long-term solution to our water problems. And some people call that social engineering, trying to get people to change their behavior so that you get the outcome that you want. And basically, engineers aren't so great at that aspect of social engineering. So I wanted to throw up a slide here. This is from the Seattle Water Department. This kind of depicts the traditional way of looking at water demand. So if you look at this slide, the upper part up through about the 80s, I have a better review of it over here. So about 1990, they did a projection without conservation, that blue line at the top. And if that were to come to pass, those red lines above it are new chunks of supply that would have to be developed to meet that demand. You have that current firm yield there in the middle. And then they show a forecast with conservation from this lower demand rate that after the actual demand has dropped, that continues to show an upward trend. So that's a very common way of looking at this. And this is a graph from the state water plan that I participated in 2021. It kind of has a similar look and feel to it. So the blue part is the reliable supply in 2015. That red line shows what the system demand would be without any changes to our demand patterns or our water use behavior. Then we also threw on there a baseline system demand that was showing kind of if we continue along the trends we've seen in recent years, that demand curve will be less. It will still have an upward trend. And then we threw on one that shows regional conservation goals, what the demand would be if we meet those goals for the Wasatch metro area. And that's a little bit lower than the baseline. So you can see that if we had no changes in our behavior, we would have a hard time meeting this demand, and we probably would need to develop the Bear River project within the next 10, 15 years to help meet the demand along the Wasatch Front. But with that lower baseline demand that we feel comfortable with, agriculture conversion can maybe meet most of that demand depending on what climate change does to our supply. And if we do the regional conservation goals, maybe we can even push that out farther. So very similar to what they were projecting there in Seattle. So back to Seattle's example. I love this chart that I saw. In fact, I've gone to presentations all over the US, and I see these charts about communities that are able to grow population-wise, but their water demand declines. And this is kind of an example of that. So the black line there is the actual demand in Seattle. And those dotted lines are different various forecasts of demand. So back in the 60s, when they experienced that spike They projected that if that were to continue, the per capita use of the population with the population projections would make the water demand skyrocket. And the next one in 1973 starts out with a little bit lower curve, but then immediately goes back up again for some reason. And then in 1980, they started to get the clue that, well, we've had 20 years of, or 15 years of kind of moderate growth or stable growth. Maybe we can bring that projection down. And on and on. So you can see that all of those projections show it would be increasing. Even that very last one where they finally kind of get a clue that, hey, maybe we aren't going to grow so fast and our water demand is going to stay pretty stable. But the point I'm trying to make here is all those forecasts were wrong. They were projecting growth in water demand that was much higher than they experienced. So this chart I got from Peter Gleich shows that water in the US peaked in about 1980, but it didn't impact our economic growth in gross domestic product. That continued to grow at a great clip, which is pretty instructive. I got this slide, and I want to kind of define what decoupling means here with this slide from a UN report on decoupling. They define decoupling as breaking the link between resource use and economic growth. So instead of those growing at the same pace, economic growth can continue up at a certain pace, but the water use or the resource use doesn't have to grow at that same pace in order to continue to have strong economic growth. So what I'm going to be talking about is a little different than that. It's not decoupling water demand from economic growth, but population growth, which is not the same thing, but it's similar. So down there in the middle, using less land, water, energy, and materials to maintain economic growth is resource decoupling, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. But I'm going to define decoupling a little bit different than that. So instead of just reducing the slope, I'm going to talk about actually declining or reducing the demand on that resource. The source for the data on the next few slides comes from this report. I want to give full credit to that. This is not my data. This study analyzed water data from 28 utilities that are located in the Colorado River Basin or receive water from the Colorado River. These utilities serve a combined population of 23 million, and the key data that they collected was total water delivered and total population served. Ashley Sampson in our office put together this graphic of this data. This shows 18 of the 28 systems that I am calling have successfully decoupled data, or that have shown the successful decoupling between urban water demand and population growth. So 18 out of the 28 had successfully done this. So in this chart, it's kind of hard to decipher everything here, but on the top of these bubbles, you have the population increase in blue, and below that, you have water delivery decreases in green. And I only included the 18 that had done both, grown positive population growth and negative water demand. So water demand had declined. And you can see that Southern California has a bunch that have done that, Arizona and Colorado as well. But only 3 of the 28 systems that they were able to get data from, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, and Albuquerque in the other 3 states. So if you put this data, look at it a different way, I created what's called the decoupling metric score, where I take the difference between their population increase and their water demand reduction, and I give it a score. So for Las Vegas, they grew 69%, their water demand reduced 10%, so that score is 79. I don't know if that has any mathematical significance. It's just the way I decided to compare these systems to each other. So you can see the Eastern Municipal in Southern California got the highest score at 94, which is amazing. They grew 88% and had a decline in water use of 6%. And then you can see that a bunch of systems in Colorado were there in the middle range. Albuquerque is pretty high on the list there, and Salt Lake City, and the ones in Arizona, for the most part, are at the lower end of the range, with California kind of expanding the whole range of successes. So this is really interesting, and I have a chart later that shows some data from Utah. But from this study, one interesting thing that they found was that the systems that were greater than 1 million, those are marked in green, every single one of them was able to achieve this decoupling as far as I defined it. And they used kind of a similar definition in their report. The blue ones, between 100,000 people and 1 million people, had a mixed success, but a lot of them were successful at decoupling. But of interest is all of them that were less than 100,000, marked in yellow, none of them were able to decrease their water deliveries, which is an interesting aspect or interesting finding from their study. So how did they do it? These are the top 3 methods that they used to achieve this success. They provided device rebates for water conservation devices like smart timers, toilets, washing machines, plumbing fixtures, and etc. They did water pricing using increasing block rates or tiered rates. And they had turf removal programs. Does that sound familiar? Because all of those things are happening in Utah as well. These are the most common water conservation measures that the systems they surveyed. This is the whole gamut of the 28 systems. They had rebates, they had pricing, turf removal, they did some water waste ordinances, and water audits, kind of down a little below that. Also, we're doing education outreach here in Utah too, but these are the most common water conservation measures amongst all these systems. So the conclusions of this study were that communities can grow without requiring more water. Decoupling water use from population growth is heavily relevant to water security planning in the rapidly growing Southwest. Large utilities serving more than 100,000 people are more likely to achieve decoupling than smaller utilities. And they attributed that primarily to resource constraints, financial considerations and staffing. But they did notice that robust conservation spending, such as in Eastern Municipal Water District in California and Las Vegas, can greatly boost decoupling success. So those 2 systems kind of rose above the rest, and one of the reasons is because they're investing a lot of money into those programs of conservation. Key to all the success was reducing outdoor water use. Of course, we knew that, that's not surprising. And the data suggests that the per capita data that they gathered suggests tremendous potential for further urban water use reductions in many communities. So there's a wide range of success of decoupling that they have experienced, and there's room for improvement from almost all the communities. So I wanted to highlight what Eastern Municipal Water District did to achieve such amazing results. I could have focused on Las Vegas or the Southern Nevada Water Authority as well, but I chose Eastern Municipal because I'd never heard of what they'd been doing before, and I found what they did quite fascinating. So just some basic facts. They serve a population of about 1 million people. 94% of their system or connections are residential customers, which is unique. That's a lot higher than most systems would have, and may explain some of their success, because that's where many of the efforts are targeted to save water, is in the residential sector. They have 12 full-time employees in their water use efficiency section, so they're committed to making this program work and achieving the results that they want by funding it and having employees that work on it every day. So I already mentioned this, but they increased over that time frame, 88% in population. Their water deliveries declined 6%, and they got that high score on that chart of 94. I should mention here that there are systems, there is another system in Utah that was surveyed. It was St. George. They grew 111% over this time period, and their water demand went up only 15%. So you can say that that's successful decoupling by some definitions, definitely, but they haven't yet turned the corner where they've been able to keep that water demand at the same level or decline, which is, I guess I'm just admitting that my definition of decoupling is pretty rigid, and there's other ways that can be successful as well. So in that Eastern Municipal Water District, outdoor water use efficiency program and rebates include a turf removal rebate of $5 per square foot. We are doing $2 per square foot for the districts plus $1 per square foot from the state for those systems that have ordinances. So not quite $5 per square foot, but getting close. They do tree rebates, so they want people not to just put rocks and desert plants in their landscapes. They want to have shade and cooling effects of the plant cover. So they are investing $100 per tree up to 5 trees for any resident who wants to change their landscape that way. They're doing weather-based irrigation controllers. They have rain barrels and cistern rebates and rotating sprinkler nozzle rebates. So there you can see the asterisk there mentions that that's a partnership with Southern California's Water Smart program. Those rebates are available for anyone in that participates in that program in Southern California. But what the district here does is they do free deep drip watering stakes for those trees, and they do free installation of water savings equipment, which I thought was pretty innovative, and that takes some of the intimidation factor away from it. Not only do you get a rebate, but they'll come and install some of the equipment for you. They have indoor efficiency programs and rebates, as shown. They do a free home water consultation. They do high efficiency clothes washers starting at $85 and going up. And they do premium high efficiency toilets. So those are the 1.2 gallon per flush models. And they also, even though only 6% of their customers are commercial, industrial, and institutional, they do these things as well. They require a separate water meter for anyone with a landscape of 2,500 square feet or more, and that includes multifamily residents. They do overhead spray to drip irrigation rebates, so their planters and the part of their landscape that's not grass, they will change that to, if you change that to drip, they'll reimburse you $1 per square foot. And then they have these innovative device rebates. Some of these are up to about $10,000 that you can do to install some of these efficient things. And that's through the Southern California Water Smart program. But I came to their water rate structure, and that really caught my attention. They have a water budget-based rate structure. So they calculate the water budget for each household based on the number of people, multiplied by 55 gallons per day. They put a drought factor in there, so when their supply is constrained by weather conditions or drought conditions, they will reduce your water budget accordingly. Then they have a billing cycle, of course, each month, number of days, irrigated landscape, square feet, times the evapotranspiration that took place that month, and a conservation factor that's based on the age of the home. So if you look at that, the tier 1, the first 20% of that budget is $1.28 per 100 cubic feet, which is about 748 gallons. Their next tier 2, the rest of the water budget is at $3.53 per 100 cubic feet. And then the excessive up to 150% of the budget at $6.73. And wasteful, anything above that, $12.95 per 100 cubic feet. And I did a conversion so that you can kind of compare that to what we do here in Utah. Most of us are billed on 1,000 gallons. That's $17.31 per 1,000 gallons above the water budget amount. So that's a pretty progressive way of doing tiered water rates. That probably helps a lot. So what about decoupling in Utah? I did a search. When I saw this report, I was like, hey, I'm going to look at Utah's data. We have access to Utah's data, the water rights database, and some data that we've gathered as a division over the years. And I could only find one system in my cursory search that had done this successfully. And that's Salt Lake City. But when I looked at the most recent data, 2023 data just got posted to our website, I found 8 systems that appeared to have decoupled based on my criteria. So that was very encouraging. But what happened in between 2020 and 2023? Well, in 2019, a monumental report about climate change came out, or mega drought, sorry. And that report showed, I have a slide on the next slide that shows a little more information about that, but that got a lot of publicity. And then the Great Salt Lake reaches record lows in 2021 and 2022 and got lots of local coverage, national coverage, even international coverage. The Great Salt Lake is an amazing ecosystem, and it'd be a shame to lose it, so everyone is concerned about it. And of course, Colorado River is in the same region and experiencing reduced reservoir storage. So there's lots of attention on that. The public knew about it, and I think we started to pay attention to that and change our behavior. And maybe many of us were starting to ask, maybe we can't develop more supply to get ourselves out of this. So I wrote down 2 state water projects, Bear River Development and Lake Powell Pipeline, that have kind of been put on hold. And some legislators, I even say, are questioning whether those projects can move forward in their present form, because the water supply may not be there to fill or complete those projects as designed. And demand management is looking more and more attractive by the day. So times are changing. The southwestern mega drought, worst in 1,200 years. I just wanted to show what that is based on. This is from that 2019 study. On the top shows soil moisture over a 19-year running mean. That's the red line, and the blue line at the top of that curve. So when this report was published, the early 2000s was the number 2 on the most extreme drought, mega drought in history. But after that happened, 2020, 2021, and 2022 brought that mean down below. So instead of being the worst mega drought in the last 400 years, it became the worst in the recorded history of the soil moisture back 1,200 years. So that's where that comes from. All right, so looking at Utah's data, I got just a few minutes left here. Using those same criteria, increasing population and declining use, there were 7 in the Great Salt Lake Basin that I found. And I didn't do an exhaustive search, so there might be others, but for purposes of this presentation, I just found 7. Salt Lake City grew 29%, their water declined 13%, Granger Hunter, similar, down to Provo, 9% increase, 23% reduction in water. So if you put that on a curve, this is where Salt Lake City looks like they've gone up in my score a little bit. And these others have appeared on this list for the first time, which is exciting. It shows that if we continue our water use habits along the Wasatch Front, we can successfully decouple our data. I'm not saying that that can happen forever in perpetuity, but at least for the time being, we continue to grow without increasing our water use. I believe that is possible. And the most common measures in Utah, I just used that same chart and kind of crossed them off that we're not doing in Utah. We don't do leak detection and repair. We had a proposal for requiring water audits of systems, and that didn't pass. We had one that would have modified the plumbing retrofits, so new construction would use more water-wise fixtures. That didn't pass. But everything else we're doing, and that little green arrow is just pointing out that we use landscape ordinances as a requirement for turf removal rebates that the state provides. So decoupling in Utah is possible, and I would argue it's not just possible, but it is necessary in order to save this great resource we have next to us, because we can't continue to grow and increase our water use in all the cities along the Wasatch Front or in the Great Salt Lake Basin and expect to be doing our part to save the Great Salt Lake. And that concludes my presentation. So I guess we'll take questions. We have about 5 minutes.
So I'm guessing that some of those successful ventures, like in Southern California, people took advantage of all those cost-saving measures because of the tiered pricing. Can you tell us of those 7 municipalities or townships in Utah where they've made your list? Are they all doing the tiered block pricing?
Yes, all water systems in Utah as of a few years ago are required to use increasing block rates. So that's not just the ones that are succeeding, but everywhere that is required. But what we notice is those tiers aren't going up very much. So as you use more water, they only go up slightly. Park City has some pretty good progressive ones that go up pretty high. But yeah, what they're doing in other places is those tiers are much more aggressive and help modify the behavior more rapidly. Thank you for your question. Good point. Over here.
Just a quick question. On the water decline, is that from the total or is that per capita?
It's not per capita. It's total water delivered. Excellent question. So your per capita use can go down, but if you grow enough, your water demand, total water demand can continue to grow. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about total water delivered and population growth. So thank you for that question. Over here.
Hi, I was wondering about the efficiency or the effect of using real-time water meters. I know that some of the cities in the valley do that. I think Sandy does, but I don't think that's universal. And so do you know how effective those are?
I don't know a lot about it, but I know that these real-time meters can detect leaks at each connection. So if there's a constant flow that's not normal, that's different than what the normal pattern is, it can automatically detect that and send you a notice. Say, you gotta look for something. Looks like there's a leak in your system. So that's a great conservation measure, help capture leaks in the home, between the connection and your home, more rapidly than otherwise. So yes, those are effective and are being installed more and more here in Utah. So,
Thank you.
Do you see a way to factor in the type of housing as single-family residences on quarter-acre lots become less and less attainable for people and they choose to or are forced to live in smaller housing units, apartments or condominiums? How do we get at that part of the equation?
I think I understand your question. Multifamily housing, they're more condensed and less landscape. Though that is happening naturally just based on the market. So that is helping us reduce overall water demand, or at least per capita demand as we grow. If we continued to grow with quarter-acre lots and we have the desire to have this nice irrigated lawn and yard, we wouldn't be seeing what we've been seeing.
Okay.
So that has been playing a major factor.
Okay, it would be nice to see that so that the people who are living in smaller quarters than they would like to can feel proud about something?
Yep. I will say that in those million-plus population cities, that's, instead of growing out, they start to grow up. And that's kind of what they're seeing, and that makes them more likely to decouple their water demand from their population growth. Doesn't look like, oh, there's another question.
I have just a question because I know that some of our municipalities, secondary water isn't metered. So how are we maybe not capturing like exactly what we're doing as far as saving, because we have so many places where we have secondary water that's going unmetered?
Excellent question. Secondary water. I did not look at any community in Utah that has secondary water because it's so hard. Well, the estimates of that, they're not all metered, so we don't really know what they're using. We're estimating it. I limited all of those for my search. Just assumed that they aren't decoupled, or at least I didn't want to look at them because it becomes complicated. Provo was the only system, I think, of those that had a small amount of secondary use, but it had not grown over that period. So I was comfortable using them in my data set. But yeah, secondary use has been, I would say, a major factor for our increased water demand is that that's cheap water that's not treated. Just provide it and don't bill, and just bill once a year or monthly for it, not based on usage. So that is changing, and I expect with those meters being installed and those changes happening over time, that water will also be managed better, like the potable water is.
I had a question. You showed the bar graph where we saw low population areas versus the higher population areas being able to achieve this decoupling. Were you able to extrapolate forward to see if at certain populations we see the leveling off where we can no longer obtain water savings?
I did not look at it that closely, but it's certainly something that warrants some more look. Some of these systems in Utah that I show successfully decoupling are less than 100,000. So Granger Hunter is, the population is above 100,000. Holiday is only like in 2003 was 12,600. They went up to 15,000. So that's a pretty small system to be able to achieve that. Kearns Improvement District was 43,000 to 56,000 population over that period. Murray, 35 to 39,000. Provo, Salt Lake City were both above 100,000. Taylorsville, Benyon was about 67,000. So I can't really conclude or answer your question based on limited data, but it appears that even smaller systems less than 100,000, if they are aggressive enough, if the population changes their habits significantly enough, they too can achieve decoupling. It's just going to be harder to sustain it unless those landscapes are actually converted and changed out, which is happening. Just give it some time, we'll get there. Thank you.